Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for logging on. My name is Catherine Morris. I'm Director of Public Programs here at the Gardner Museum, and I'm so excited to take you behind the scenes of Witness, Spirituals and the Classical Music Tradition, a video series with 4 episodes highlighting how Black American composers have found inspiration in spirituals. Now, before we begin, I have a few things to cover that I think are very important. First off, although we are virtual today, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum sits is the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people, and would like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Secondly, I'd also like to share the Gardner's inclusivity and anti-harassment policy with you. This is very important. The Gardner is an inclusive museum that welcomes everyone. All visitors and staff have the right to a safe, respectful experience at the museum. Discrimination and harassment will not be tolerated in any form, either in person or virtually. And one final note, this time on technology. I'll be moderating today's discussion with our lovely, amazing speakers, as well as a brief Q&A at the end of this talk. To submit your questions, use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now, the fun part begins. I'm going to introduce you to 2 key, amazing, phenomenal people on this project. George Steele, the Gardners, Abrams Curator of Music, and Ashleigh Gordon, Artistic Director and Violist of Castle of Our Skins, which is a concert and educational series dedicated to celebrating Black artistry through music and spotlighting unsung and celebrated figures in music, past and present. Ashleigh and George, thanks again for being here with us. And I'm excited to have you both here to talk about this project. So, George and Ash, can you tell us about the inspiration for the Witness series? And tell us more about this project and collaboration.
Well, I'll jump in a little bit. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Ash, and thank you, everybody, for coming. It's a real pleasure to talk a little bit about the series and to get folks, I hope, excited about it. Ashleigh is one of the musicians I heard about earliest when I came to Boston, and we've worked together since on a number of projects, and I've come to admire particularly the project Castle of Our Skins, which is an extraordinary resource in Boston, putting a lot of energy behind bringing Black artistry to the stage, particularly the music of Black composers. And we had Castle of Our Skins appear, I've lost sense of time, but I think it was 2 seasons ago. They were meant to come back last spring, and they're going to come back in a year's time. At the same time, the museum itself has been exploring the work of particularly Black composers, which always involves a lot of research. It involves a lot of extra work to bring this music out in front of the public, which has been, for one reason or another, kept away. I have had a particular fascination in music that derived from spirituals for a long time, particularly through the work of Harry Burleigh, a composer I knew since I was a kid. And I was thrilled and fascinated to discover in the museum's collection that Isabella herself owned a book called Afro-American Folk Songs. There it is, by a music critic called Crabeel, kind of a New York music critic who was in the circle of Dvorak back in the old days. And you can see Isabella's name there. Isabella in 1921 had a little dinner party with John Sargent, as she usually did, and with a bohemian couple from Paris, the Gerald and Sarah Murphy. They were the sort of jazz age couple. Gerald Murphy was a painter for about 9 paintings, and they're terrific, by the way, modernist jazz age pictures. They lived in Paris as expats. They painted sets for the world premiere of shows by Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. Gerald Murphy had a huge interest in African-American music. Particularly, he had the coolest, apparently, collection of jazz records in Paris in the very early 20th century, but also had an interest in traditional spirituals and other music. And so when he came to this party, he and his wife performed a couple of spirituals, which is a complicated idea, given that it was an entirely white, rich dinner party. But it's clear that Isabella was very struck by the beauty of this music, because a few days later, Gerald Murphy sent her this volume with a letter, which is in the archive of the museum. And when I looked at this book, I saw that there were a few arrangements of spirituals. It's really a musicological study. And those arrangements were by the great Harry Burleigh. So the project rounded out. And with that excitement, I chatted with Ash about turning something we were hoping to do live this season into this kind of a project. And maybe, Ash, you can round out the story a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I'm also excited to be in this virtual space, and quite virtual space in all these recordings as well too. This is for me an extension of the work that Castle of Our Skins is already doing, which is really to highlight Black artistry. And so when approached by George, it seemed quite fitting and an opportunity to continue to sort of nerd out and deepen my own understanding and help promote as best I can, which is through music. So this series is a series of 4 short movies, really. So another opportunity to sort of be in sort of a limelight, as beautiful as the Gardner is, and certainly in the recording project, was really also quite appealing. And each one of the series, the videos in the series, highlights a different spiritual. So the first one being released next week, this month, is Deep River. And then each month after, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Wade in the Water, and Calvary. And in addition to highlighting these specific spirituals, more broadly, trying to provide context around spirituals, their history, the artists who championed them, et cetera, the composers as well, who championed. So each video is a wealth, even though they're short, a wealth of music, a wealth of performances, both filmed at the Gardner, as you see some in these images here, and in New York City and possibly other places, a number of stories similar to what you just heard, as well as even more to help provide context around these particular works and the natures of spirituals in general, and also just history, which is, I think, a beautiful starting point to really try to delve into this genre of music. So being released this month and then the next few months after. And another reason why this project is really exciting for me is that it's an extension, as George, you already alluded to, the relationship that's already established with Gardner and Castle of Our Skins. And in thinking back to when we first made an appearance, it was at this point 5 years ago on Gardner's Indigenous Peoples Day, which was a free, open to the public celebration. And we got to perform in the Sonic Cube, the Calderwood, and do what we do best, which is present music by Afro-diasporic composers. And since then, we've performed in Free Fun Friday. We performed on an incredibly rainy Sunday with 10 cellists and dancers, Julius Eastman, packed audience, oddly enough, with it being so rainy, in 2019, and look forward to being back next year, April, I believe, 2022, with Natalie Joachim, Grammy-nominated flutist. So this is one of many things that we have done and are continuing to do in partnership with the Gardner.
That's truly amazing to hear. We're so honored to continue to work and build relationships, especially with Castle of Our Skins. Your work is absolutely amazing and important. I know that you mentioned about Deep River, so I'm gonna turn over to George for a moment. If you could just tell us a little bit more about the first episode, Deep River.
Sure. So each episode is structured. They're about 10 minutes. I'll confess that the first episode runs slightly longer, but we wanted to make something that was beautiful, not to rain on our own parade today, but Zoom musical performances they're unable to transmit what the musicians are giving. And we wanted to make the best things that we could to show what the artistry of these musicians, and that was to make these beautiful little films. So each film concludes with a performance by the string quartet version of Castle of Our Skins of a single movement or a single movement work, or in like one case, a couple of excerpts of a standalone piece which is derived from a spiritual. And then the first half is sort of micro documentary, as Ash alluded, with some other kinds of history and the talk a little bit about the spiritual on which the final work is based. So this first episode, we're trying to, the excitement and the piece you're going to hear in a minute, the concluding work is by William Dawson, and we'll talk more about that. It's a Largo for string quartet. This will be the first time this piece has been heard in something like 100 years, and we're thrilled to bring it to the screen. But it is a newly composed work. It's clearly flavored by spirituals, and it has melodic characteristics that I would say are derived from Deep River. And I think you'll hear that. It doesn't sound like Deep River, but it contains the seeds of that music. And the first half, we'll hear the tune Deep River, which was a piece, it was arranged by the great Afro-British composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor in a suite of piano pieces. It was arranged by Harry Burleigh, the fellow I mentioned earlier, who did the arrangements in Afro, what was it called? The Folk Songs volume by Kriebel. And it was Harry Burleigh's version of Deep River that Marian Anderson sang. She did not sing it at this famous concert. She sang another Burleigh spiritual arrangement and a couple of other spiritual arrangements at the Lincoln Memorial. But Marian Anderson was a great champion of Burleigh's arrangements. And it was Harry Burleigh's arrangements of spirituals that really put the spiritual on the concert stage for classical singers. And it was Samuel Coleridge Taylor's arrangements that kind of gave them to classical pianists. And from there, this extraordinary tradition of building classical works on this material began.
Wow. All right. Well, let's see if we can hear some of the clip, if possible.
And this is Burleigh's arrangement. And it's old recording. Oh, she was just on the big note. Yeah, that's an amazing voice, Marian Anderson. And one of the folks we have in the video is a beautiful contralto, Nicole Mitchell. And it's fascinating to talk to her because, you know, contralto is a very rare voice, I think, as many of you will know. And to hear a contralto, you know, for whom Marian Anderson is the greatest in the 20th century, sing this same repertoire is quite a treat.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you know, with all of which you're describing, you know, the connections, which are very, very clear, it's important, you know, and to make sure these voices are heard. I'm going to turn it quickly over to Ashleigh. If you can tell us more about the work by William Dawson played in this episode.
Sure. Yeah. I also just want to acknowledge that Nicole Mitchell is here, I think, in this Zoom box. So amazing to have fellow performers being involved in this conversation as well. William Dawson, yeah, I mean, born in the early, sort of the turn of the 20th century, African-American, at a time when, born in Alabama, certainly at a time when literally millions of Black people were making an exodus, the Great Migration to the North, at a time where there is reincarnation after reincarnation of oppressive and laws and rules unspoken, et cetera, those that were enacted, lynching, et cetera, and great oppression, at a time also when there were hotbeds of Black cultural intelligentsia, music, literature, et cetera, just explosion of creativity and community and a feeling of creating and elevating an identity of what Blackness is, right? With W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, other people coming to the forefront and helping to advocate for an identity around Blackness. And certainly with respects to spirituals, being so tied to a lived Black experience, not removed by time, very much so. When you think about the early 20th century and you know, Reconstruction, a lived actual experience, wanting to create that as being part of this central view of what Black identity is. So Dawson comes from a long lineage of composers who took this very specific Black idiom and put it into music in this way, what we would consider Western classical music. I'm happy to talk about and can go on a total diatribe about the contentiousness behind that. So let's save that one for a little bit later in this conversation. But I'll say in any case that he Dawson and other composers at the time, William Grant Still, Florence Price, Margaret Bonds, etc. H.T. Burleigh, obviously, Robert Nathaniel Dett, wanted to elevate this art form in this kind of way, and for all the right reasons. I mean, the sound of the music has such power, such emotional universality to it. It's evocative of sorrow and freedom, and is in all senses triggering. I mean, you can hear the ancestral sort of plight in this music. So it reminds me every time I hear of it, sort of like a reading an Octavia Butler novel, Kindred, for instance, and you're literally transported to a different time period. So it's very powerful music, and the music specifically isn't, in this particular string quartet that we'll hear an excerpt of, based on Deep River, but it has sort of the essence of, so minor thirds and this sort of pentatonic and nostalgic Southern kind of feel to it, and is one that is really just lovely and sweet and melodic, and is something to have a lasting sense in your ear, sort of like perfume that's wafting in a room after someone leaves. It leaves a feeling, I'll say, and look forward to hearing it now, I think, right?
Yeah.
We'll have a little bit of a clip.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I'll just briefly share that along with myself on viola was Gabriela Diaz, first violin, Mina Levcheva on second violin, and Francesca McNeely, cellist, all members of Castle of Our Skins.
Thank you. Truly, truly moving all together. And as we all know, there's inherent power in music and what it can do for our lives and for people and for the times in which we live in. And it's very clear, even from just this snippet, the power in which music can hold and communicate to all of us. But we also know that music, particularly around spirituals, has a complicated history. There's a lot of things tied to it. Um, um, and so I'm wondering, and Ash, if you feel free to respond to this, but George as well, what does it mean to make this project with music that carries such emotional weight in history?
Well, that's a question that we tried to put to all the folks we spoke to as a part of the project. You see on the left of your screen, Delka Prescott, and again, Ash helped us to find a group of folks to speak with us. But I think, Catherine, the answer is to put the question in the middle of the conversation. That's an urgent question, and also, we were trying to be careful to say not all of the works by these composers were based on spirituals. That some composers worked, like Dawson, for instance, worked almost exclusively with spiritual material. but other composers like Alvin Singleton or Hale Stork, or there are composers who touch on spirituals in one or two works, but spend most of their career away from them. So we don't want to limit folks with this material or to tie them to it, but rather it provides an extraordinary through line to look at a huge number of composers. And I would say that many people watching this series won't recognize any names, or maybe recognize one or two names, but the rest should be surprises. And that is also part and parcel of the project. That Dawson piece, hasn't been heard in a long time, because we found it among his papers at Emory University. I had heard he has an incredible symphonic work called the Negro Folk Symphony from, I think, 1934. Ash will remember a bit more than I, but somewhere around then. A huge, glorious piece of music. And it's so virtuosically written for the orchestra. I thought, this guy must have, the only other music I knew of his was choral arrangements of spirituals, which are also kind of orchestral in thinking. There are a lot of sophisticated vocal writing and noises and sounds and really delicious out harmonies. And so I went to look at the finding aid for his papers, and I saw a little violin sonata. And I called up Emory and asked for the papers. They sent them over, and there is the violin sonata, which is a beautiful piece in its own right. And then there were two versions of the slow movement. He obviously loved the music so much, he made a piano trio version of it. And then I saw a string quartet version. And I've been pursuing that music. And as the project came up, I thought, why don't we do this piece? And so in order to do it, we had to get permission from the family. And I'm very grateful to them for saying yes. And then we had to commission an edition. A guy called Charlie Harmon, a terrific musical editor, made a performing edition of this piece, which hasn't had a performing edition except for the manuscript down at Emory. And I shared it with Ash, and she said, terrific, we're happy to take it on. So it's a really beautiful project to bring something so delicious out to the public for the first time.
Yeah, and happy to be involved in this project again. I wanted to give a little bit of historical context too, in relationship to your question, Catherine, about what it means to do this now, and just sort of presenting spirituals in general. At around Dawson's time, this early 20th century time, there is a lot of contentious debate within the Black community about whether or not this was appropriate. So composers, even like Robert Nathaniel Dett, who often would create what we call art songs, concert songs that, for instance, Marian Anderson could sing, or Roland Hayes or Paul Robes and other performers at the time with voice and piano. He's quoted as saying to remove the rough timbers of spirituals and put it into this sort of pure art form of Western classical music, which at the time, in thinking about wanting to elevate and using scholarship and education, W.E.B. Du Bois, that makes sense. But in hearing this in 21st century minds, it's like sort of neatening out your hair, sort of a comment. Well, what's wrong with the quality of my hair? What's wrong with the quality of the spiritual in and of itself? Zora Neale Hurston, the great poet, also had contentious issues with this in wanting to sort of take a traditionally oral type of music and put it in 5 lines and 4 spaces, take something that involves call and response, take something that involves movement and communal participation, and put it in voice piano sort of arrangement. So there was practical issues with this sort of assimilation. Langston Hughes famously has a poem where literally a Black classical musician dies. The closer he gets, the more he practices and is ingrained in classical music, he dies. His Blackness, his Black identity dies. So in any case, it's deeply rooted and has a huge history in that kind of context. It also has a huge history as it relates to coming back in times of distress, when hope and aspirations are needed. Certainly civil rights, and we are certainly in a period of civil rights. Coming back to this, in 2006, musicologist Calvin Earle created a resolution and put it to Congress, of which Senator John Lewis at the time helped pass, to create a national treasure marker for African American spirituals, and make sure that it is nationally recognized as being this powerful well of not only just notes on a page, but the stories and histories that are associated with it. And I think coming back to it at times of distress where we're in now, but other times when we can come back to it, it has this charge of strength. It has a charge of resilience to it that I think is appropriate at any time, and certainly appropriate, I think, now in the world that we are all engaged with today.
Yeah, and what's worth mentioning, there was just an article in the New York Times by a woman called Caitlin Greenidge, and she talks about a woman named Ella Shepherd. Ella Shepherd sang in the first group of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, who were the group out of the Fisk Institute, who were the most famous performers of kind of concertized versions of spirituals. Even though they were an a cappella vocal group, they were also criticized even in their own day for a kind of glee club approach to music that, as Ash points out, had a different kind of tradition. But Ella Shepherd, that member of the group, wrote a memoir about her time in the spirituals. And she says that, she says, had the white instructors of the Fisk Institute talked to her and said, you need to go sing this music in front of the public, she would have been horrified that it was not, that wasn't what the music was, the private music for a private community, and an intense emotional expression that was not meant for the kind of voyeurism of the concert stage. And it was only by performing the music around that she came to understand what the meaning of it was. So clearly from the very earliest days, turning this extraordinarily charged and beautiful music into a public music has been fraught.
Wow. Wow. That is very, very moving to hear. There's been a lot of sacrifice, it sounds like, with the music that has been made from the composers themselves and how it's been able to show up in our lives even today. It's because of the work that both of you all are doing to amplify these stories and the history behind this music, but also what it could potentially mean for us in the current moment and beyond. And it's very true. Music, spirituals, all types of music is a reflection of our lived experiences. How it's interpreted changes by generation, but it's still reflective of things that have happened in the past, what is currently happening, and what could happen in the future. So I think there, in what you all are saying, there is inherent messaging that is happening. And it's my hope that the audience, when they see these episodes, really make that connection and begin to understand its importance. So with you, George, can you tell us a little bit more about who else you've collaborated with this project? And for Ashleigh, if you can tell us more about the music featured in the other episodes.
I'd be happy to, and I'll start just by saying something that we mentioned in the first episode, which is that Harry Burleigh, one of the earliest folks to turn spirituals into concert music, and one of the most important, described spirituals for a musician, for a composer, for a Black American composer, as pure gold. So it's music that he loved, and he saw it as, and W.E.B. Du Bois says in The Souls of Black Folks that it is something like the greatest form of human expression born this side the seas. He is unstinting in his praise for this music's inherent emotional power and its importance to the American identity. So there are a lot of complicated sides to what is a big, beautiful, and difficult set of questions. Ash has been singular in helping us to put together a group of folks to make this series of videos. We have the same wonderful string quartet in all four. It's Ashleigh and the three other women you just heard, members of Castles of Our Skins. And in addition, there's Nicole, who is our beautiful contralto from New York, but then Emmett Price, who's a preacher and musicologist here in Boston. You know Emmett, Catherine. He's wonderful. And Ashleigh also recommended Nedelka Prescott, who's marvelous. She herself is a performer, a composer. She works at conservatories. She puts together student groups to look at spirituals, both in traditional performance modes and in all kinds of new modes, jazz, Caribbean inflections, everything. She's a wonderful resource. And Ashleigh herself gives an introduction to every single final piece.
Ashleigh?
And also Kyle P. Walker, who I think we'll hear
Yes,
a
I'm
little
so
bit
sorry.
later.
Kyle
Yeah, too.
Walker, a
Yeah.
fantastic pianist. I did not know, and Ashley said, "Oh, I know just a person called Kyle," and he's a fantastic pianist and a
Mhm.
lovely, lovely guy. And he also gives on screen.
Yes, and I think we'll hear a tiny bit of him later on today, and certainly throughout these other episodes, and to share a little bit more musically, at least from the string quartet side. I know George, you're also performing piano in some of these, and also presenting context as well too. So there's lots of music and lots of collaborative hands on deck for all of these videos. In addition to the Deep River with the Dawson sort of alluded to in the first video, there will also be Swing Low Sweet Chariot, variations from Adolphus Hailstark, a set of variations, his second string quartet, originally written for the Marian Anderson String Quartet. Then we'll have Frederick Tillis, who passed away last year, has UMass Amherst connections, local connections here in the sort of Massachusetts area. His Wade in the Water from his 12th spiritual fantasy. He has many fantasies as it relates to spirituals and for all sorts of instrumentations, but his 12th, obviously for a string quartet. And then Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, who is a stately seniors man, no longer with us, but such a pioneer in helping to preserve, record, create archival spaces as it relates to African diasporic music. His Calvary String Quartet, just the first movement of that piece.
Wow.
We've been busy.
Yes.
Coleridge Taylor Perkinson is his name. He makes a beautiful arc named after, of course, the British composer. A fantastic composer, and again, very little known by the broad public. Ash and Castlegar Skins have done a lot to promote his music. I fell in love with his music a few years ago. We've given the string quartet Calvary at the museum, but he's got a fleet of wonderful pieces, fantastic piano sonatas, just an amazing, amazing composer.
And also conductor. He was instrumental in, I believe, the 70s in creating a 10 CD album of composers from the African diaspora, ranging from Chevalier de Saint-Georges and earlier to Ali Wilson, for instance, all Black men. So I have a mission to do a 10-disc Black female, but in any case, very instrumental. And again, the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago, and just creating archival space for musicological study as it relates to this field.
My goodness. Yes, you all have been working very hard. So it's just great to see this magic come together. And the audience is definitely in for a treat or a series of treats. I want to conclude with a final question to both of you as I hear you all listen, and I can see the attachment, the excitement, the reflection on the process. What do you hope viewers should take away from this project?
Well, for my part, I would like people to be amazed and excited, at the size of this body of music. We're talking about many hundreds of works of music by dozens and dozens of composers. And I want, people to see how rich the musical universe is, and how much primary research there is to go out and get these works out of archives and to make editions, or even to find works that have fallen out of print, and how vital Ash's work is with Castlegar Skins, and how the whole country needs to lift this music up. So I want people to be struck by its beauty and thrilled at the prospect that there's so much more of it.
Likewise, same, and definitely think that this project can do this. Even if you watch one out of the four, hopefully you watch all four, but certainly each one of they think these videos is capable of doing that. Whetting people's appetite for wanting to learn more. Part of our mission and my personal mission is to foster cultural curiosity. So to know that this is a snippet of something larger, and to be inspired to find and tap into what that larger is, I think is really important. And then also, in addition to what George shared, which I also am hoping for with this project, is to see a physical space like the Gardner in a new lens, and to have a different association perhaps with respects to its history, and hopefully to then be inspired to take a look at other physical lenses and think about, okay, how can this be shifted if I have a different perspective or a different entry point into viewing this.
Wow.
Beautiful, Ash. And yeah, the fact that the collection, the building itself, the collection itself, and the mission of the museum are equally powerful platforms to lift up many kinds of music and many stories.
Well said. Thank you both. Wow, time flies. I'd actually like to turn this over for a Q&A session. We have some questions that have been fielded. So I'll ask these to you all, and whoever wants to go first. The first question is there a reason you chose these four spirituals specifically?
I think that's for you, George, right?
I suppose so. So Ash and I talked about the repertoire. It's we needed pieces for string quartet for this first series, so that's number one. They needed to be based on spirituals. They needed to be beautiful, and they were boring behind the scenes things like we had to be able to clear the rights for them, et cetera, et cetera. So in some cases there were works where the rights were unclear. In other cases there were cases where the rights, for instance, Florence Price's music, which I adore, and both Ash and I have been working to lift up, is sort of it's at the moment in a transition of rights, which is it's a positive sign. It's at a publisher, but it's much more difficult to secure the rights to make a film. So there are artistic ideas, there are access ideas, and there are practical ideas. It has to be for string quartet, and we wanted to be able to draw an arc in the episode. So it needed to be a work based on a spiritual four-string quartet that connected through other works to the source. But I can tell you that we could continue this series for a very long time, and there are untold riches and many, many pieces that are on the side table that we're dying to bring to the public. I mentioned Alvin Singleton. He has a tiny, crazy modern piece on swing low that's not in this series, but could be. And there are, as I say, dozens and dozens of other works that we would have brought and hopefully will bring in the future.
Thank you, George. Genius. We have another question. It's amazing how much the first musical excerpt, the string quartet, sounds like Dvorak. I might be butchering the name. To what extent did the instructional program he created at the National Conservatory of Music in America influence African American composers, and how did it reach them?
I can start with this a little bit. So Anton Dvorak did have a position here in the States. Often we, in association with African American spirituals, reference a quote he is attributed to in saying that, well, there is already, in terms of an American sound, you have it, and it's Negro spirituals, which of course at the time was not met with open arms. Harry Thacker Burleigh, H.T. Burleigh, was one of his assistants, and through H.T. Burleigh, his own lived experience was able to showcase and highlight, and here are some spirituals to Dvorak, which now Dvorak is often credited with, but behind most you can think of Elvis, and the names keep going, but behind most large figures who are not Black, you can often find, but we can have that conversation later, I guess. In any case, so H.T. Burleigh was someone who was very instrumental in showcasing African American Negro spirituals to Dvorak, and certainly without Dvorak's intervention, again, there's no shortage of composers and performers who we have referenced in today's discussion, and certainly throughout these videos, who have on their own elevated this expression as well.
Yeah, I mean, Burleigh spoke many times, formally and informally, about his teaching this music to Dvorak, and his surprise when he heard the music coming back at him in the Ninth Symphony, the Symphony from the New World, particularly Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. So we decided in this series that we didn't want the gravitational pull of Dvorak's Ninth Symphony to obscure the real story, which is that music came to Dvorak from Harry Burleigh, and Harry Burleigh was already he was picking up a performance tradition from his grandfather, and it was already corresponding with Coleridge Taylor in England, and they were performing together, and that's the indigenous creation of this body of repertoire. So it's certainly, there is a Dvorak connection. It's not clear. There's a wonderful new biography of Harry Burleigh. It's clear that he was amazed to hear this music coming at him. It's not clear whether he was delighted or horrified or amused or puzzled. That's not clear from reading it. And I don't want to put words into his mouth or feelings into his heart. But we can say that he went on to write glorious music based on this work.
Wow. Wow. Well, given that you all have spent intimate time with the artists, the musicians themselves, one of the questions we have is how did the musicians feel performing in the Gardner galleries? And does it mean or feel something distinct from performing in a regular concert hall?
Well, working with Bear Walk, the videography team, the beautiful images that you saw, the stills as well as from Bear Walk, told us, could you bring a couple outfits? So of course, for women, oh my gosh, what are you going to wear? What are you going to wear? So we when I had the picture of the red room, the Raphael room, and thought, okay, well, our colors are red, white, black, and gray. So we need to coordinate. And it was fun to get decked out, first time in a long time that I've put on some heels, and certainly during this pandemic, and have an opportunity to experience something, to be in a different space. We've certainly, as I shared before, have played in different parts of the Gardner, have obviously walked around when there were, I'm blanking on the name, but we could have wine and sort of walk around on, like, I don't know, third Thursdays or something, and music in the courtyard and sort of schmooze around networking. But to play and perform in one of the galleries, and certainly to be shared and hear a lot about the history of the artwork on the walls and et cetera from archivists and the horticultural team and all the people that you don't necessarily engage with on a day-to-day basis, to see all the people and sharing and hearing their stories was great, was amazing.
And I mean, I would say, we have a quote from Samuel Coleridge Taylor in the video where he says, and I'm loosely paraphrasing, he says of his project of writing these 24 Negro melodies for piano, he says that what Dvorak has done for the Czech music, and I've forgotten who else he mentions. Ash, do you remember?
Brahms as well.
Arian, so on.
Right,
He says,
yeah.
I try to do for Negro melodies. In other words, to elevate these pieces and to give them, to canonize them as a part of the great tradition. Now, as Ash pointed out at the beginning, that's a complicated set of statements.
Yes.
But I think for me, seeing and hearing these pieces in the Raphael room, in the Dutch room, in the full context of what the museum is, what it means, which is a public and yet a domestic setting, a setting that reverences beauty and creativity, and that holds up some works as exceptional. I think it means everything that these exceptional and profoundly beautiful works, which have probably never been heard in this building, are at the epicenter of its artistic life.
Wow. Well, emotionality and experiences and coordinating all of that inside of our galleries is always amazing. And I'm glad that we get to experience that and enjoy it. So I'll be looking out for the color coordination, but also just seeing the emotionality and the response body-wise to the music that is being played. Ashleigh, I have one question for you that a lot of our audience members would like to know. Can you tell us about the history behind the name Castle of Our Skin?
Sure. I love referencing this. Often what we do is, yes, music, but music and often spoken word, which is very intrinsic with Black artistic expression, as well as dance, movement. So our name comes from a poem by Nikki Giovanni called Poem for Nina Simone. And in thinking about reading the poem and thinking about how that translates to us, to paraphrase, it says, we're all imprisoned in the castle of our skins. And if that's the case, we might as well treat our skin as being a palace, adorning it like the Raphael room with beautiful things, and seeing it as being something to be proud of, which is a complicated association with Blackness historically in this country, but one that we work very hard to elevate in everything that we do. So celebration is very much at the forefront. Pride is at the forefront as it relates to Black expression.
Beautiful. Thank you. I have one final question that I believe both of you all can answer. And that is, in hearing both of you all talk about process, how long did it take to create these videos, and what did the planning and research process look like?
Well, we're still working on them. So the video that drops next week, the one you've seen a preview of, I reviewed and made notes on and edit this morning. So it's a huge process. I think Ash and I began to think about pivoting from a planned concert series to a planned video series early in the fall. It was sort of on the radar. And as we began to put it together, this evolved. But my research on the William Dawson piece had already begun a year before. My interest in Harry Burleigh's music had already begun. My relationship with Ash was now 3-4 years old. So the streams of interest were already flowing, and they came together. And as I say, it's a gigantic amount of work. We had, I think, 2 filming days for the music in the Palace. We had another filming day in New York City. We're about to add, I think, an additional filming day just to make some beautiful bridge music. And we had something like 4 hours of interviews to be cut down into, the interviews now will make up less than half of each movie. So it's probably 20 minutes of interview time at the absolute maximum, culled out of 4 hours of conversations. And lots of back and forth. Ash has been working for a long time and suggesting to us music. We've been going back and forth about that and about people who might be a part of the series, all compounded by pandemic impossibilities. So it's been an intense project. I'm sort of glad we had a time away from giving public concerts to pour ourselves into it, body and soul. But I hope that we've learned enough that when we're back giving public concerts, we might be able to keep doing something like this.
Thank you. I know research is never easy, but you all have crafted such a beautiful series that I know the audience is going to love. So thank you both for joining us today. So to the audience, just want to say thank you for experiencing this with us. It's been amazing. Thank you for joining us. These videos will be released over the course of the next few months on our website. So with the first one going live next week, we will send them to each of you via email and are dropping a link into the chat of where they'll appear on our webpage. If you'd like to send this along to any friends who might be interested, there's a space on our webpage for them to sign up and receive videos as well. So pass it along, tell a friend to tell a friend. That's always important. Spread the love. We're also dropping a link to a blog post on our website that shares more information about spirituals and Gardner's connection to them. But before we leave, because we're always about treats, we're going to leave you with a final piece of music to enjoy as you log off. It's a piano piece of Deep River by Kyle P. Walker. So please enjoy. with that, everyone, thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.